started this demand-driven approach to rural water supply and sanitation from Swajal to the Cochin Declaration and the Government of India sector reforms. He's taken that to scale in other parts of the world, Cairo, Egypt, Vietnam, and Lebanon. So we're really delighted to have Parmeshwaran Iyer here. I'm personally delighted because in the policy world, he has been a mentor to me too. We also have with us, Adarsh is not here. I'll introduce him a little later.
I've joined.
Good to see you. So see you, Adarsh. So Adarsh Singh is an IAS officer again from Uttar Pradesh, which was the old cadre of Parmeshwaran Iyer. He's a 2000 batch IAS officer. He's actually a doctor who studied in Maulana Azad Medical College. And he's done some wonderful work as the State Rural Livelihoods Mission Director. We have with us Krishna Bhaskar. He is a district collector and magistrate at Rajana Sirsilia. And I read about his work in a newspaper, and I shared it in my Facebook post because I was absolutely amazed in terms of what was being able to be achieved without regulatory structures in 2 flat years, raising the water table by as much as 3 meters. I think it's not just Krishna has done that, but Dr. Arun has also done that. T. Arun has also done the same thing. He's currently Secretary Health in Puducherry. He has restored as many as 200 water bodies. And he has been facilitated by the Tarun Bharat Sangh, which is an NGO giving an award to a bureaucrat, which is definitely creditable. So with those words, I welcome all of you, and I leave this session to Mr. Iyer to chair and take the discussion forward. Just one little thing in terms of why do we have you here as a first session, simply because we want to learn what are the kinds of lessons which we should be following in terms of dealing with water and climate change. Thank you so much.
Great, thanks so much, Satyajit, and good to see you again. Good to see Madhavan, Krishna, Adarsh, and Arun. That's our panel, right?
Yeah.
Perfect. So, I think this is going to be a very interesting discussion. I'm just going to make a few remarks, and I really wanted to hear from all of you, particularly from our young officers in the field. That's where I think I learned the most, particularly during my stint in the Swachh Bharat mission, but also wanted to acknowledge Satyajit's phenomenal work in the whole policy space on water writ large. We worked together in the World Bank in the Water and Sanitation Program. And I think Satyajit brought in a very rigorous perspective, in terms of the analysis. He was always pushing us to go in for more evidence-based approaches, as opposed to sometimes when we get carried away, we forget about the sort of rigor which we need to bring. And I think Madhavan as well has led a lot of excellent studies when I worked with him in WaterAid, in terms of whether it was wastewater reuse or on sanitation. So it's really good I think we've got a very strong panel. And basically what we're going to talk about from different perspectives is what do policymakers, really want from a study which is looking at people's voices in the ongoing water climate change debate. And I went through the proposed studies, and I found it fascinating because I think it's bringing in a very real ground level perspective. But before we do that, let me try to give you a bit of a macro picture from at least the World Bank's perspective. I'll come back to the Government of India shortly. And we just finished quite a successful water learning week And both Satyajit and I, many years ago, used to attend these weeks in Washington, where it was a phenomenal experience of all the water staff of the World Bank, typically people from outside, experts, would come and share their views on water writ large. And I think that's one of the advantages of working in the bank. You really get a perspective of water all the way from, water security, water resource management, that the big picture, all the way down to service delivery, which is, getting into micro of whether it's sanitation, toilets, rural drinking water, utility reform. So the gamut was discussed. And we just had a very successful week where we went across all different aspects of water, but focused on climate change, which is why I'm coming to this topic. And the theme was water, climate, action, with the stress on action. So, a lot of the problems are sort of known. What are we doing about it? What is the best way to set about it? And I don't want to go into all the big gloomy arithmetic numbers in terms of, whether 60% of people in the world are living in water stressed areas, our cities are running out of water. Can throw out a lot of statistics, but I think we all know that there is a looming water crisis. Water in Davos, in the World Economic Forum, has always been one of the top five crises in the world, right? What are the risks, and whether it's a risk to people are directly affected. And I saw from the study whether it's the coastal areas of Orissa, in the Bundelkhand, the spring sheds of Uttarakhand, the tribal areas in Madhya Pradesh. I think this study is looking at different agroclimatic zones, which I was very happy with. So there is a water crisis. Now, I don't know, I'm sure most of you have looked at the last Human Development Report with the UNDP brought out on the age of the Anthropocene, where they're saying that for the first time in 300,000 years, it's people who are shaping the planet, not the other way around. And I think that's at the heart of this proposed study. What can people do? I mean, we know they're affected. What can they do? How do we know what to do? And how can we learn from people who are directly affected by climate change and the nexus between climate change and water? And we believe that water is actually the great connector. Water cuts across health, environment, food security, industry. Everyone needs water. That was the point which Mr. Recently the chairman of the Tata Group, Chandra, made, that, the Tata Group is not necessarily doing water, right? It's not a utility, but they need water for all their businesses, whether it's for automobiles or, whether it's for chemicals.
उसको भेजना होगा ना दीप्ति के लिए
So water
सोशल
is
मीडिया पे post
everyone's business. And today, in the context of climate change, we heard from the California general manager, 1 year there are floods, 1 year there are droughts. So, and this has got a direct impact on poor people in particular. And I think the study is going to focus on the poor people, whether it's, rising seawater, jobs being affected, livelihoods being affected. I think there are huge ramifications of how climate and water are directly related. And in the World Bank Group, that's the focus we're trying to give today when there's much more emphasis on climate. How can we make the case better to policymakers? How can we make the case better to finance ministers, to prime ministers, that the need to focus on climate is now? And for that, we need to hear voices from the ground. So I'm going to mention 4 or 5 reasons why I think it's important for decision makers to listen to voices from the ground and people from the ground. Satyajit and I worked a lot on that demand responsive approach, where we learned how it's important that communities understand the importance of scarcity of water, of lack of access to sanitation, and how do they deal with it. But we were only looking at the service delivery in those days. Today, it's important to look at water writ large. And some of this we did, and I'm sure Krishna and as well as others would have done this in the field. The Jal Shakti Abhiyan was a water conservation movement which the Prime Minister launched a couple of years ago, where we focused on water conservation measures, particularly before the monsoon in India, because we know we get 2 months of rain and then we don't store that water. And this is not really the time and place to talk about large dams. We want to talk of local water storage, water conservation, etc. So I've got 3 or 4 points which I thought I'll throw out for discussion, and then I'm going to hand it over to the other panelists. So what do policymakers want in terms of water and climate? I think one is basically to understand the advocacy is really important. If this study is going to tell us what people in local communities, how are they directly affected by climate? I saw this when I was working in Vietnam, in Ho Chi Minh City. The point was half the city was, under relatively imminent threat, whatever in terms of climate years, of seawater being just 1 meter away, right? And the city was in a sense sinking. So that's going to affect livelihoods. It's going to affect the whole urban planning. Now, whether you're in a coastal district in Orissa or in Bundelkhand in a drought-prone area, that feedback, evidence-based feedback, which the study can give policymakers, helps to make the case. And that's something which the politicians like to listen. How are people directly affected by something that influences decisions? So I think that's going to be one concrete use of this study. There's nothing more convincing than that of how people are affected. Then the second point is it's a reality check as well, right? Because as this study mentions, there's a lot of top-down planning and climate. We talk of investment in the World Bank, how much money needs to be spent, what's the cost, what are the solutions, how do you do adaptation, mitigation, etc. But what is that impact on real people? I think that's a reality check. Now, again, let's not forget that this is all linked with policies for alleviating poverty. Now, for example, we typically the discussion on climate and water has been more about adaptation. How do you adapt to climate change? But we're finding increasingly mitigation is becoming equally important. So, for example, wastewater reuse, something which Madhavan and team have been working on. Whether it's in a utility or whether it's at the local level, reuse of wastewater. These are what are now known as nature-based solutions. So, how do we do that on the ground? And mitigation, now, how do we grow rice more efficiently, which will mitigate emissions? So there's a new program which we are going to start in the bank, which is nicely called Paddies for the Planet. And so it's a kind of win-win-win. More efficient water management, better irrigation practices will reduce water consumption, less pressure on groundwater. It'll become yield. It'll lead to greater yield, so more income for farmers and less emissions for the planet. So this is now, but this can only be done when you work across sectors, and that's the other point I wanted to mention. Policymakers need to learn from the ground that unless you work across sectors and across silos, and you learn that from the ground, the best integration is at the gram panchayat or at the village level, because the community is not bothered about different departments in the state capital. But as collectors, as CEOs, all of you know that you do everything together. And that's another place where there's integration of different sectors together. But in departments, in states, and ministries in the government, again, we tend to work separately. So and the Ministry of Jal Shakti in the government of India was one good example of at least bringing together two important ministries, the water resource people and rural water and sanitation. So service delivery came together with water security and water resource management. So I think that needs to happen much more. That happens on the ground. A farmer who is not getting enough water to irrigate his crops and not enough water to drink, and therefore has to go to the primary healthcare center because he or she is sick. And a girl drops out from school because they don't have toilets. That's why all sectors come together. And I think much more of that evidence of that is going to be important to continually make the case to break down silos at a kind of federal state level. So I think that's the other reason why this is going to bring us closer to that thing. And I think finally, let me stop by saying that what Satyajit and I learned from our days in the Swajal Dhara, the sector reform program, was that if you really want to sustain and you want to learn the how, you have got to get studies from the ground. And so Satyajit was leading studies in Kazipet, not in Kazipet, which was the district, Satyajit, in Kerala? Couldn't hear you.
Kasargod.
Kasargod, sorry. Kazipet is on the railway station to the south, so I keep remembering that. Kasargod and the one in Andhra, which one was that? So I got you on that.
Yeah, I got you.
Anyway,
getting old.
So we were doing pilots where essentially we were getting local planning done so that local institutions, the Zilla Panchayat, the Gram Panchayats, how would they take charge? How would they integrate? And I think that's another thing I'm looking forward to strengthening the policy dialogue on strengthening local governance, because governance is going to be very, very important. So I think continued evidence of these approaches is very useful for us. Let me stop there and hand it over. Let me go first. Let's go to Krishna to tell us what he thinks about this whole aspect from the perspective of his experience in Sirsala and even earlier. Krishna?
Thanks a lot, sir. I hope I'm audible.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I'll just very quickly speak about what happened in my district, sir. Our experience has been, and I've been in the Indian context, I've been rather lucky to be in my district since October 2016, except for a brief interregnum of around 8 months for the elections, where I was posted near my district. I've been there right from the beginning. So I've been able to actually see what works and what doesn't in the context of government intervention. And the truth is, we have had very non-linear results. When I joined, the district was a very left-wing affected area, and the entire district was classified as an IAP district, drought-prone district. Every single model was either severely drought-prone or minorly drought-prone. And we carried out a lot of intervention. I'll very quickly speak about them. But the results were seen only after 3.5 years. The district was mainly static, and there was a spurt right at the end. So it's a very non-linear process. And I have a couple of points which I'll just place before this panel now. The first part, I'll just talk very quickly about what we saw. So our water levels were more or less static, and suddenly last year they went up by 6 meters all of a sudden. And this year they may go up by another 1.5 meters. That was a big deal for us. And even our agricultural output went up by nearly 75%. So 110,000 metric tons originally for paddy, and it's gone up to around 195,000. This year we're looking at 225,000. So interventions raised one by one, because I know time of the essence here. We rejuvenated a lot of our original water bodies. We had around 666 of them. And as today, as I speak, 450 have been rejuvenated. That's one. The second is we took up a lot of works, which were fresh works. These were not old works, like, for example, farm ponds, or, for example, new village ponds after acquiring land, talking to the panchayat. Then we also took up big reservoirs. We have especially around 3 very big reservoirs. One of them is exceptionally big. It's 27 TMC. Put it roughly, that's enough to feed about 27 Hyderabad in 1 year. No, I'm sorry, 27 Hussain Sagars in 1 year, which is what you find in Hyderabad. I think I just overstated myself a little bit. This is probably about 3 Hyderabad in 1 year. And practices. A lot of people, there was a lot of behavioral aspect to what we did, and making sure that people use less water, trying to get sprinklers in place there, etc. Then a lot of tree cover. Our tree cover has gone up by around 1.8% in 4 years. For us, it's a big deal. It looks like a small number, but in terms of number of trees planted which have survived, it comes to around 3.5 crores. And so these are all, and finally, of course, the kind of crops you're growing. We've tried very hard to move away from paddy and cotton, which are essentially water guzzlers. But our experience has been very much like the Red Queen in Alice in Wonderland. You run as fast as you can to keep staying at the same point. The moment water levels go up, the people who otherwise never thought of paddy, who never thought of cotton, are again, wading into this entire business of growing water-heavy crops. So that is a dilemma we have to figure out here. We haven't yet cracked it or solved it. But the very fact that they're encouraged to take up more water-guzzling crops in this moment in the short term is for us a matter of encouragement. I believe in the long term we'll be able to get better. The problem I have here is, now I've mentioned about 7 interventions. And the truth is, government has a major thrust in only one of them. That is big reservoirs. So the pull from government, the push from government, the follow-up, and the release of budgetary allocations is most prompt when it comes to big reservoirs, where there is, a large amount of civil works involved, where infrastructure is visible, and I'm sure for a lot of political reasons as well. The other 6 I talked about were essentially items we had to evangelize very relentlessly over 4 years. Now they've come around to us. And the second point of what I'm saying is, it is also true that reservoirs have an outsized effect in increase of groundwater level. There is no doubt about it. A single reservoir is probably the equivalent of, I would say, at least 200 farm ponds in the vicinity. There is no doubt about it. However, the reservoir is also about 1,000 times expensive as 200 farm ponds, as one farm pond. So essentially, there has been no study, since the point I'm trying to come in is, there has been no study which actually tells us for 1 crore of rupees spent, how many meters of groundwater am I able to get up in my district? And we've searched for it. I've gone up on Google Scholar, we've searched, we've been trying to convince government. The moment we're able to convince government that I know you like big projects, I know you like these big projects, I know you see results in them. But if you believe me and go for these, I'll be able to get you better output per paisa spent. Now, we don't have this on the ground. And I believe that would be exceptionally useful, especially when you have to convince a politician who all his life, a political life of say 30, 40 years, has seen consistently that big projects produce results. It's very difficult to make them to come around this side. And my last point here, and this is something which I've been thinking about ever since I've stepped into the district, it always struck me, and my district in that sense has been, I'm exceptionally lucky that I've been able to see water levels go up. But it always struck me, I keep thinking of Peter Palczynski, an engineer in the Stalin government in the USSR. So he was a man who again took all of Stalin's big projects and the entire area, and was able to prove through calculation that forget about his entire huge hydroelectric projects. If I were able to just place bales of hay on the entire land acquired for these projects, I'll be able to generate more energy. Now, the outcome of that was to shipped off the camp and exterminated. But the truth is, I'm not sure we have enough data to say what Palczynski said and still convince government. If it turns out at the end that big huge projects are still the best, I think we can go ahead with a very clean conscience. But we have this nagging doubt. And therefore, if you are able to somehow generate a metric which actually tells you the amount of results, see the amount of groundwater output or the amount of, say, agricultural output that changes per 1 crore rupees of intervention in a particular area, I think that would be very useful. That's all from my side.
Thank you, Krishna. Fascinating, discussion and great points you have made. And so, where's the evidence for small is beautiful, right? And it's a great point. It seems to me, I hadn't really thought of it for that. How much groundwater can you restore for 1 crore? And
that's just one of them. Another could be how much more agricultural output, or how much more, say, anything else.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I don't know if there are any studies on this. You said you couldn't find any, and but it's a great idea. Can we move on now to Adarsh? Adarsh, good to know that you're a medical doctor, and so please share your experiences in the context of this discussion, and then we'll come to Madhavan after that. So Adarsh, over to you, and nice to know that there's a fellow UP cadre officer here.
Thank you so much, sir. And on a lighter note, sir, the first thing that comes to mind when one sees you is the run rate. So I can assure you that we've all stuck to your sort of run rate, and our state is now ODF. Now the challenge, of course, is to ensure that that is sustained and the toilets that have been constructed are being used, sir. So I'm currently posted in Barabanki, sir, and this is a district which technically lies on the Purvanchal part of Uttar Pradesh, but it's one of the nearest districts to Lucknow. It's just 30 kilometers. It is also one of the most fertile districts of UP. The water table in most parts of the district is quite high. I don't think there is a single block in my district which is in the dark zone. And it's also a district where agriculture is quite diversified. We have people who are doing all kinds of farming. We have farmers who have also won the Padma Shri for their efforts in farming. But what was surprising, sir, and again coming back to the point that you made and to what the other panelists made, there is so much disparity in the district itself in terms of the water table. We have areas where Barabanki is also a district in which one of the few districts in which we have mentha growing. So the pockets in which this crop is going, it's an extreme water guzzler. In those pockets, the water table has started going down to an extent where the crop is now dependent only on the Neher system of irrigation in UP, you would know. So inside the district itself, there are wide disparities. There was a river in our district, sir, an intra-district river around 173 kilometers, which had become which had disappeared in most places. So there was a lot of when I joined the district, a lot of people came to us to address this issue, came to the administration. So we decided we'll take this up as a pilot project, sir. It was more complicated than one could imagine, sir, because there are so many departments which are involved whenever you take up a project of this sort. We started with only 2 villages, around 4.5 kilometers length of the river was focused upon in that pilot project. And my greatest challenge was to bring all the departments on board, be it the irrigation department, be it the forest department, the flood control department, the revenue department, the rural development department. It was a massive challenge, but it was a satisfying experience because this happened just when the lockdown happened, the first lockdown in March last year. And we also had the advantage that the migrant laborers who were coming back from Maharashtra and other places, they pitched in, and we managed to revive that 4 kilometers of the river. And the point I'm trying to make is that a very small effort led to a major result, because in that 4 kilometer stretch in the monsoon season, in the paddy season, for the first time after several decades, farmers were able to sow paddy in those areas. Such was the impact, because of the fact that otherwise the water in that river used to spread to all the adjacent fields. There was complete waterlogging, and nobody could grow any crop. But because of this, they were able to grow paddy. They had a sort of a perennial supply of water, not just for their crop, but also for their cattle. So it led to an immediate sort of effect on their livelihood, on their earnings. So this is the kind of impact, so that a very small intervention in a very small area can have an immediate impact. So that was a great learning experience, and it was a very satisfying experience, and that led to a demand from the other villages as well that we should not take it up. And I'm glad to share that now we have, in the second phase, we have taken up around 10 villages on an additional stretch of 40 to 50 kilometers. Before this district, sir, around 10 years back, my first district was Chitrakoot in Uttar Pradesh. You know, sir, it's in Bundelkhand, and one of the most water scarce regions of the country. And it was frightening to note that in peak summer months, there were villages in Chitrakoot where even for drinking water, we had to send tankers. Such was the scenario. I'm sure that that may no longer be the case in most places now because of the efforts that the government has undertaken. But bottom line, sir, is that there can be no single sort of strategy even for a single district. We need strategies, as you rightly pointed out, for every gram panchayat. And the second point, sir, is about ownership. For example, we have in UP for a very long time, we have had drinking water projects which have been established in many districts. They are traditionally undertaken by the Jal Nigam department, and then they are supposed to be handed over to the concerned gram panchayat for maintenance. That, unfortunately, is a system which is not worked. And in most places where the Jal Nigam has withdrawn, those projects have unfortunately become defunct because the gram panchayat does not take ownership. There is no user fee which is extracted, and in no time the tank stops working, the pipelines are broken, the pipeline is stolen. So that is something which, as policymakers, I think we need to sort of find a way in which we can sort of enable the community to take ownership of this, to maintain it, to sustain it, and to realize that at the end of the day, they are the ones who need to take care of it for their own good. And this is also a problem that was addressed in the Swachh Bharat mission as well, because just constructing toilets is not going to solve the problem. We need behavioral change. That was the entire concept of the CLTS methods, and it has succeeded to quite a great extent. And it is you would be happy to note, sir, that in most villages now that we go, we see that people are sort of using those toilets, and there are exceptions, of course, and there will always be exceptions, sir. But I think the same sort of concept of community ownership now needs to be elaborated upon, to be used in projects related to water, in projects related to water conservation, and in water consumption as well. So that is all that I would like to say at this point of time.
No, that's excellent. Others, fascinating examples, and I think complementing very well what Krishna pointed out, that as you mentioned, small actions lead to big impacts, as you said. And I know you guys did a fabulous job. I've been to Barabanki many times as well, before your time, of course. And but in terms of the impact you can create, the need, there's no blueprint. It's local, within districts. It's local, and I think and how do you make the case to policymakers? I guess we are all sort of policymakers in our different domains, but fascinating examples from Barabanki as well as from the Bundelkhand Chitrakoot. So thank you for that. So before we come to Madhavan, who's going to give us some very wise words, let's go to, can we go to Arun first? Arun?
Yes, sir. Good morning, sirs. And it's a great privilege to be here. Sir, I was right now I'm holding charge as Secretary Health, but just 1 month back I was District Collector Pondicherry. Pondicherry, as we know, sir, it is one of the water stressed district as per the Jal Shakti Ministry. So what we initially did was, of course, we made some sort of a the convergence, as Adarsh sir was telling, the convergence of all the department is very crucial. What we did was we sent our revenue team. Most of the time our revenue records would be having the display, the FMD will be having the water bodies, where the water bodies lies and all. We started surveying each and every water body in every village. We started making some sort of a inventory, documentation of every village. So on an overall, per village, we used to have 2 to 3 water bodies of various sizes. So with this, we were able to map, survey it, and we started displaying the board that this is a water body, this is the name of the water body, this is the extent of the water body, this is the reason number, the survey number. So then we started utilizing then the challenge came about how to mobilize the resources for desilting, for restoring. One option we took was the CSR. The companies, nearby companies, the schools, most of them when we approached, initially they were reluctant, but slowly they started coming up. So with that, we started restoring each and every water body. So what has happened is, a flat land or an enclosed land, we started removing the encroachment, we started restoring it with the help of JCB and all. So, and the best part of this water conservation is we can see the immediate results, sir. The moment it would be a flat land or a houses or shops would be there, once you restore, water started accumulating, water started oozing out from the earth. Within 2-3 weeks, we can able to see a water body, a water filled ponds and all. So with this, we started huge encouragement among the public, among the NGOs and all. Many NGOs came forward. And I still remember, sir, in 2020, the Women's Day, one of the women's organizations came forward saying that they want to restore a water body. Please, we allow us to take up one water body. This is the kind of mass movement that initially happened. So then we started, notifying each and every water body, and we started adopt a lake, adopt a pond. Something like that strategy came out. So all thanks to the entire revenue team, sir, we were able to survey each and every water body. And with this, we are able to see immediate rise in the groundwater level also. Up to, as per the Central Groundwater Authority, almost 15 feet has been raised in a very short span of 1 or 1.5 years, sir. So this method, one is the convergence, next the CSR, and the mass mobilization has helped us to raise the water levels. and restore as much as water body. I am sure in most of the cities, I think the revenue records, once we go back to our own revenue records, we can we can easily restore most of the water bodies.
Now, Arun, that's tremendous
Yes,
work, I mean, just mapping out all the water bodies, getting your revenue staff involved, that's, kind of critical first step. Otherwise, and that's, again, the sort of evidence-based approach. First of all, you don't even know where, these bodies are. So that's a necessary first step, which many of us ignore. And then involving the local communities, and, a great sign of demand when that community led by women came forward and asked to be allowed to restore their water bodies. No, that's great work. And again, I saw recently, I was happy to see the Jal Shakti Abhiyan was launched by the Prime Minister a couple of days ago. And I very much like that catch the rain. He's always very big on local solutions. And you saw, he said in his speech, we don't need to go in for the big structures. Krishna mentioned that as well, and so did others. Let's get in, farm ponds are better, and if they're more efficient and they lead to higher productivity, that's the case we make. So there's political leadership there. Now I think it's up to us, and something which Satyajit and I have been talking about a lot. And I know it's a very UP cadre thing, I have to say, but I'm sure you guys also use it. The grand formula of PM, CM, DM. And then, we added VM to make it rhyme. But I mean, you guys integrate, right? I think institutionally, this is the role you guys play is so critical. It's a unique structure. I've not seen it anywhere in the world. How the district collector or the development officer has the ability to integrate, because we keep talking about integrating, but in India, you actually have the institution, whether it's a CEO, ZP in Maharashtra, Karnataka, Gujarat, or the collector in other places. That's phenomenal. And I think that's the reason why, one of the main reasons why we have been able to have this kind of success, to have youngsters, and they have that ability to convene, and they integrate. But anyway, on that note, Madhavan has got phenomenal experience all over India and even internationally. So Madhavan, please, your take on what do policymakers really want out of these kinds of studies?
Thanks, Param. Like Satyajit said, sort of interesting to be an interloper amongst a group of IAS officers serving or retired. I'll start off with a short, sort of quick anecdote. Some years ago, the director of the National Water Mission reached out to us. And they said they wanted help with an effort that they've been undertaking to try and create a climate action plan for states. And we discovered that they'd actually sanctioned money. They found money and they sanctioned 10 lakh rupees to 7 states and asked them to prepare climate action plans. With some nudging, the climate action plans came back. And they found that all of them had been prepared by the irrigation department. So letter goes to the state government, chief secretary marks it, goes off to irrigation department. And so all these climate action plans had been prepared by the irrigation department. And suddenly they had this problem. So they decided that, look, we've got to fundamentally try and change the way we're going to get this, because having the irrigation department preparing a climate action plan makes no sense. So they started to map the number of departments or central ministries which I had a role to play either from the demand or supply side of water. And I think they ended up with a list of 136 central ministries or central agencies which had a role to play with either demand or supply of water, or had a role to play with climate change, for example. And they were then trying to get all of them to agree on a uniform template that could then be prepared looking at both demand and supply of water, sent to the state governments to collect information to do this. So, our part of our problem is that, so on the one hand, we've had some great examples of how this integration is possible at a district level and where you have dynamic district magistrates, collectors, everything seems possible. And suddenly when you scale that up, life just seems to get so complicated that it's hard to imagine where to begin. I think there are 2 or 3. So while I think the discussion about mitigation and adaptation is important, I think from a policymaker's point of view, we need to recognize that while both need to go hand in hand, but the impact of climate change on the poor is the greatest They are the most vulnerable because their ability to respond quickly, to pivot, given the pace of climate change, is limited. And therefore, adaptation must always take some precedence over mitigation, because for them it's a question of life and livelihood. And I think that it's also important to recognize that not just do the vulnerable have poor coping mechanisms to respond quickly to dramatic changes in a short span of time, but also they have very high dependence on common property resources. And that dependence on common property resources also needs to be sort of recognized. I think just 4 or 5 things which I think, based on what we heard from Arun, Krishna, and from others. One is that I think it's important for us, at a macro level, we know what are the hotspots. But I think we need to now start zeroing this down and get better granular information about, within a district, for example, which are the likely hotspots from a climate change perspective, and who are then going to be the most vulnerable. I think it's very clear that we need to recognize, so like Arun has done, Krishna did, we need to recognize, be able to map where our common property resources are, our surface water bodies, our forests, our pastures, and we need to be able to have this information and quickly start addressing. I think the importance of common property resources are very important, and we should be looking at these. We have a paucity of good quality information. And in the absence of that information, then decision making, even at a district level, becomes challenging. And it's worthwhile sort of investing in trying to address that. We often tend to think that technology is going to offer quick win solutions, all of that. Now, if you take, for example, the National Aquifer Mapping Program, it's probably the most sort of elaborate exercise being done anywhere in the world. But the reality is that the outputs are at a level which can't be interpreted by a district collector. They're coming at a scale where the kind of thing that Krishna has done or Arun has done, NAQUIM's data outputs are not going to provide them with clarity on where are the recharge zones for their aquifers. And therefore, where do you need to maximize your soil and water conservation efforts? This assumption that also gets made is that, so we've got to be clear that if the objective is to enhance recharge of groundwater, then sometimes just looking at surface water bodies could lead to an increase in decentralized storage or an increase in soil moisture, but won't necessarily recharge your aquifer. And so we need to recognize that we need that kind of information to be able to proceed on that. One thing is very clear, and I think Krishna's example, and I think Param's your own experiences would bear testament to it, is that there is always this tension between quick wins and investing for the long haul. And unfortunately, our incentive systems very often get skewed towards only recognizing rewarding quick wins. And we've got to find a way to balance how do you get those quick wins, and how do you also manage to get people to invest in change that is going to have a long-term impact of the kind that has been described by some of our earlier speakers. So quite clearly, I think there is. What's remarkable about hearing from Adarsh, Arun, and Krishna is that one is struck by the fact that if you have passion, if you have commitment, our rules, regulations never get in the way. That they're all able to find ways of actually pursuing what is required. And laws don't seem to get in the way, policies don't get in the way. So it's a question of how do we then unleash this on a national scale and to empower all of them to be able to do what can drive this change. Thanks.
Param, before that, I forgot to introduce Madhavan. It's late in the night here. So Madhavan, as you would have heard and realized, he's a person with about 30 years of experience in the water sector. He started work in Urmul in Rajasthan, and he was there for about a decade and a half. And he spent another decade or so in Chirag in Himachal, in Uttarakhand. And he's worked on a number of areas, basically rural areas. And for the last 5 years, he's been the chief executive for WaterAid India. And he's an important partner with UCSP in this study.
Yeah, no, thanks, Satyajit. I missed that myself. I thought everyone knows Madhavan. So, but yeah, but it's later for me, by the way. I'm 3 hours ahead of you. So, so I've got more excuses than you have. No, but Madhavan, some very, very pertinent points, and I know Chirag well. Were you around Madhavan when we were doing Swajal in Chirag? Then when when we had the lady who got poisoned with mushrooms.
Yeah,
No,
Una.
that was Arohi. That was Arohi. But anyway, so but these points you're making up, NAQUIM, absolutely. It's too macro. In fact, when we were doing the Jal Shakti Abhiyan, there's this guy, I've forgotten his name. He's I think he's a sort of remote sensing guy. He was saying that he can get down to kind of granular detail in a village, and he can actually develop drainage maps. So the contours of literally drainage in villages, uh, but as it turned out, it wasn't quite as granular as he made out, and so that's a big challenge. And you're right, NAQUIM is if not 60,000 feet, it's at a much higher level. And the other point you mentioned, which is coming out from what everyone has said, whether it's others or Krishna or Arun, the mapping is critical at a local level. I think obviously you need technology to digitize it so that it can be used well, but I think that granular detail is critical, which is typically not available. Important point you made, and this is something we're all grappling with: the balance between quick wins and the long haul. And look, the reality is, whether it's the average tenure of a collector in UP in my time was 11 months. I don't know what it is now. Others, it could be more, it could be less, but it's not much. And I think, where Telangana is much more stable, and without a doubt. And so you can do much more. And in fact, I mentioned in my book, I did 1 year in Bijnor, then I got kicked out. We were doing the total literacy campaign. So it's difficult to think very long term, but that's the reality. And my take on this is there's a political cycle of 5 years for elections, for general elections, for elections in any state. And typically a politician is thinking in terms of his electoral cycle. And it's going to be difficult to go beyond that. And there may be very visionary people who are confident of being there forever, but 5 years, if something, and obviously climate change can't, you can't be doing many of these things in 5 years. So you need to have long-term vision, but we'll still need to deliver within a finite time frame, whatever that may be, 5 years, 4 years, 3 years. So that's the political economy, a term which Satyajit and I learned from another colleague, a fancy term like that. That's the reality of functioning and of taking decisions at a policy level. But I agree with you, there is a tension. All of us have tried to grapple with it. And many people have told me, in the case of Swachh Bharat, so 5 years, impossible. Like Bangladesh took 15, 20 years. If you really want to do it properly, sustain it, get that behavior change going, you need much more time. But it's very difficult to sustain that interest. I was secretary for 4.5 years, as you know, and I worked closely with you. There were at least 2 generations of collectors, if not 3, in my stint. And I think, except for one state, which was Assam, and even he left, Siddharth left before I left, everyone got changed. So if you're, it's quite difficult. Look, collectors are young, and you can work with collectors because most of them are young, energetic, enthusiastic. But secretaries, you work with someone, they leave. So in other words, I think, we've got to make do with the time frame we set, which is set for us. Obviously, you can't do the impossible, but if in one Jal Shakti Abhiyan or in one Atmanirbhar Abhiyan, you can do what others did in Barabanki or others have done elsewhere. So I think we've just got to, from a very pragmatic point of view, but point is well taken. But I agree with you in terms of the critical need for information and data. And I think that's something which can come out of the study which you guys are embarking upon. What are those critical data sets, and how can we kind of retrieve that and use it for analytical purposes, which can feed into policy decisions? I think that's going to be important. It's got to be in easily digestible form. But I think we've got time for another round. Satyajit, how are we doing on time? Can't hear you. You're muted.
We are done on time. No, Yeah, we are done on time. We are actually 8 minutes more. 8 minutes over. There are some interesting questions which have been raised here, and there are some chats already happening.
So why don't we take some questions, and I'm going to direct them at members of this panel, because
okay.
These are the guys.
Shailaja mentioned something to Krishna, which is love paddies for the planets. May I suggest millets for sustainable agriculture? But she said she is going to say more when she comes in as a discussant in the second half. Okay, Shailaja is here. Shailaja, you want to come in?
Oh, I would love to. Good morning. Sorry, I'm slightly garbled. It's still not even 5 a.m. where I am in the UK, but good morning all. I was going to say, starting with you, Param, if I may, that, paddies for planet's great, but can we move to less water use? And since the government of India has now raised the Odisha millets mission to millets for the year 2023, can we see a shift in terms of water use? That was for you. But I'm really fascinated by the 3 case studies that that Adarsh, Arun, and were presented by them and Krishna. And I was thinking about the rebound effect, because what I'm seeing is, at one level, what was described by Krishna was the point that water becomes more efficiently used, and quite rightly a farmer community thinks now we have more water and we can use it for more income generation. And I think what's being raised by that example, also by the excellent examples from Arun and Adarsh, is that what we're seeing is that we need to understand the timeline and the manner in which the livelihood changes occur as part of a climate change mitigation strategy. And I think that's where Madhavan's discussion points to me are very, very important. Unless we understand how they see the water use, particularly the watershed and the recharge, it's about having perceptions that can be matched as we move forward. And I think one of the speakers said, we tried to do it, it's not sustainable. I really think this is about perception sets, that of a local officer and their group wanting to do surveys and what communities want to see. I won't turn this into a lecture, because as an academic, that's a danger. I'll shut up now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think obviously we will not be able to compress everything within the time frame, so there would be discussions which will happen after the conference at various points, and we hope to be able to engage with that. Param, I hope you will wait till the end of this session, because we'd like you to get a little flavor of what we are trying to do and get your inputs there. So I'm going to rush through my presentation. Can we have print screening, please? Can I share a PowerPoint? Is that possible? Sagita?
Sure, sir. You can just, there is a share screen option, and you can just share. Everybody will be able to see.
It says host disabled participants.
Just disable all panelists.
Okay, let me just kind of start in terms of what we are.
Yeah, could you please try now?
Yeah, okay. You can see this?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Okay, so Madhavan and I started talking about this in October in terms of a study around water and climate change. And the idea was that let's do some immersive research with students from UCSP to be able to get a better understanding of water. Why are we trying to do the study? Because most studies on climate are around the issues of carbon, and most water and climate studies are based on climate models, which are macro pictures. Most climate and water studies are based on what are called project evaluations, and these are places where projects are in place. So clearly these are evaluations of priority areas, and many issues about water and climate change are kind of missed as a result of it. There are also structural difficulties in terms of getting data sets, because these data sets are not available. And if these data sets are not available, you also don't have interpretive studies on water and climate change. Water is also huge, as the collectors pointed out, and as Param was pointing out. There are a range of issues. They are complex issues. There is water and sanitation. There is drinking water. There is water resources. There is agriculture. There is energy. There is water for cities and habitation. So it's a large area and complex area. So most of the focus on water and climate have been from these narrow perspectives. And Madhavan was insistent that we try to get a range of local data, local voices, in terms of trying to figure out the ongoing adaptation initiatives, but much more than that, how do we get these voices out to the policymakers and the development partners? What has been our inspiration in terms of method? Clearly, two inspirations. One is from Robert Chambers and the second is from Amartya Sen. Robert Chambers talks about can we know better, talks about the importance of immersive research in terms of getting local knowledge out. And Amartya Sen talks about the whole positionality of knowledge. Depending on where you're situated, those are the kinds of knowledge productions you need to take. And as activists, as academics, we need to position ourselves in terms of whether we want to make an impact at the local level, etc. The other is the policy hat, which we have, that knowledge generation has to be for praxis and it has to be for change. So yes, it does give us a better understanding of marginality, vulnerability, exploitation. It does help us understand intersections of collective action and social and institutional transformation, and praxis for a policy engagement to design adaptive climate change policies. And here I think it's important that mitigation usually happens once there is risk, but I think what we need to be doing is proactively address existing social and institutional vulnerabilities. So what are we looking at? We're looking at existing climate variability and anticipation of change as it affects poor. We are looking at existing drivers of vulnerability so that we can build institutions, reduce those shocks. We're looking at community lessons, which are local based, and we're also trying to look at whether there is going to be a global or a spatial application. And importantly, what came out from what Param said, that you can't only look at it sectorally, you have to look at it in terms of a wider poverty alleviation mechanism, in terms of local developmental needs, and also in terms of cultural aspirations of local people. Why participation? Clearly the demand-driven focus which is there, but really in terms of climate change, the ones who are going to be most affected are the world's poorest, and these are the ones who have the least carbon footprint. Top-down models do not work. Param is the great I mean, the entire, once he moved into the Ministry of Drinking Water and Sanitation, he moved the entire sanitation approach from a demand-driven toilet construction program to a behavioral change one. Participatory methods will help us identify power relationships, whether that's for gender, caste, tribe, or other levels of exploitation. It is also a participatory mechanism which will help us look at the linkages between the market forces, neoliberal forces, the demands on water needs, on water extraction at the local level. So those are some of the reasons why we require participation. I think the key point really is here where everybody talked about integration. We talked about integration at the district level, but the Gram Panchayat is also an institution which integrates all the different tiers, different government department which works on silos, and here is a way where that can be integrated. Param talked about the challenges which are there for a collector and how the tenure of the collector is unpredictable. And I think if we move further down to a decentralized level of the local government, perhaps there would be greater synergies at that level. The tentative overview of the project is very simply, we're looking at three things: life, livelihood, institutions. I will not talk much about these three because I think the different case studies will touch upon them. What are we looking at? What are the different aspects? So we're looking at different agroclimatic zones, upper and middle Himalayas, the coastal areas, the semi-arid floodplains, forests, agricultural plains. We're looking at the states of Uttarakhand, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Odisha, Madhya Pradesh. These are considered to be the Bimaru states, and this is where about 70% of India's poor live. And we are also going to be looking at Karnataka, Gujarat, and Ladakh. We are working with a range of partners. So what we really have is a three-level partnership between UCSB and WaterAid, and then a partnership between WaterAid and the field level groups. And I can't thank enough the local partners who are working with us: Abhiyan Aga Khan Development Network, the Bar Mukti Andolan, Chirag, CARD in Madhya Pradesh, Pragati Jubak Sangha in Odisha, Prahit Samaj Seva Sansthan in Madhya Pradesh, Pramath in UP, RCDC in Orissa, and the Swami Vivekananda Youth Movement in Karnataka. So throughout the study, we hope to get inputs from groups such as this, which is policy experts, academia. For this particular methodology section, Professor Shailaja Menon from Cambridge University and Professor Praveen Singh from Ambedkar University would be providing inputs, but we'll have more occasion to get inputs. I think the key here for us is that we are partnering with WaterAid, and WaterAid has a long association with field level work in India. It is able to bring in experts internationally, locally, together, and for us, this is a huge learning platform that we are engaging in. Now, yesterday night, I was looking through the studies, and when we were doing this study evaluation, some kind of an introduction in mid-February, we realized that we have to let the studies be on their own. But we realized that there is a lot of integration which is happening. Now, if you see the brown spine, as I call it, that is really the focus of the study, which is state capacity, institutions, governance, and policy, and then looking at social inequalities and agriculture and livelihoods. But around that, there are a range of issues which we will be covering in all the studies. Sorry, I'm rushing through simply because I want to make sure that we have enough time for the case studies. So we look forward to your inputs. This is going to be a short study. We see this as a pilot to try to help us understand the complexity and the range of issues which are there at the local level. So I'll stop there and let me start calling the next panelists here. So how do I stop sharing the screen?
Yeah, you can just click on the same button. It should work.
Okay.
Okay, sir. Thank you so much. What is he
Can you see me? Can you see the screen now?
No, not anymore.
Okay, great. So I don't have a program with me here. Can somebody tell me who's next?
So we have Abhishek Likam, Dennis Chauhan, Mr. Dolma, Megan Eager, Nick Bissonnet, Palin Kelly. Yeah, and we tried to contact Mr. Karthik Joshi, but oh, he's also here. Okay.
Okay, so can we start with the Karnataka case study, Dennis and Nick?
Yeah, so If I may go ahead first, Dr. Satyajit.
Yes, please.
Okay. Okay, I think I can follow after this presentation is
yeah.
Okay, after
yeah.
lecture. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So hi all, good morning all, and namaskara from Swami Vivekananda Youth Movement Karnataka. First of all, thank you so much, sir, and and all the panelists. It was very exciting listening the session in the morning. So I'll be just quickly going through the slides and the small study that we are going to conduct. So main focus is on to three parts, like the replenishment of the groundwater in the drought-prone areas of North Karnataka. That is Raichur we have selected, where we are working since almost 5 years now. Yeah, coming back to the next slide. Yeah, so this is a brief about the organization, that what we are doing till now. So this is we have an experience of more than 30 years working in water, and then 20,000 plus people we have reached, 12 districts, 30 projects, and this is just approach and the key strategies those we are focusing on. Yeah, and these are some of the things that we are regularly doing, like the relevant experience. So we are regularly training all the irrigation engineers actually through ACIWRM, because we believe in IWRM. So we are working in the sector of IWRM since 5 years, and we have trained more than 500 irrigation engineers, as Madhavan was rightly mentioning. So we are working on integrated water resource management, and we have an immense experience in internal and external way both. And because we felt that they directly work on the ground, so it's very important for them to understand about the integrated water resource management stuff. Now next, coming back to the Raichur project Google Map location. So this is the cluster that we have taken near Raichur. So this is Raichur entire district is a drought prone area, and it's also called as the aspirational district in Karnataka right now. So if you take all the districts in Hyderabad, Karnataka, starting from Gadag to Bidar, so they are all called as the aspirational districts in terms of water especially. And if I just talk about the sanitation coverage as well, I think it's still a challenge in these areas as well. Next is the content of the study. First is of course aquifer mapping and watershed management, then groundwater recharge through different methodologies, assessment of vulnerability and integrated water resource management. And fourth is the water quality. That is the most important thing. That's what we felt. Yeah, and we have done some amount of work already, on aquifer mapping and watershed management. So this is what we have done again, with WaterAid India, with whom we are working since almost 25 years now. So conceptual hydrological layout of aquifer underlying the Raichur cluster. So we have already, sort of done this mapping, and where we are, getting the water. So that entire theory we have totally understood. Next is the recycle of water. So we are doing recharges with injection well, rainwater harvesting, as well as the recharge through dug wells. So this we are regularly doing. And this is a water conservation through our components. So we have a clear-cut coefficient. So per cubic meter, how much water we have been able to replenish or save. So this we have clearly mentioned through the coefficient. Yeah, next, coming to the study. So mainly we have selected two themes. First is conservation of water. In that we are so mainly the entire theme 1 and theme 2 are focusing on understanding the view of the community. Now when I say conservation of water and understanding the community view, like as per our Raichur's experience, there is a space for debt storage we have to keep in entire pond or lake or any water body. Otherwise, the village people will jump back on you, and they will start fighting that your entire recharge structure is sucking up the water. So what do they mean by water conservation? How they have understood the water conservation? Did they understand the entire water cycle that they go through? And as per our experience, the response in Raichur from the community has been very, very, I would say, bad in terms of understanding the groundwater recharge, because I always feel that, whatever water is available throughout the year, especially in the summer for our cattle or, the people, it's already sucked up with, all these interventions, those we are doing already. So we have sort of, trying to understand through focus group discussion, in-depth interviews, as well as a simple cross-sectional study that we are going to do. And we are going to collect nearly 300 samples for this to understand, what people think about the water conservation itself and the timelines that I have already put. Second thing is watershed, of course. Third one is, the farmland, because there had been lots of discussion going on the agriculture front. Now, again, the community's response is, that the groundwater recharge is sucking up entire water and nothing is, sort of remained on the ground. So this is another one challenge that we are, trying to find out whether the people understand or not. Whatever we talk, we discuss, we make policies, but what people think, I think that is the most important thing. That's what we felt. And the theme number 2 is assessment of vulnerability in the community in terms of the quality of the water. Like in Raichur, we are working in nearly Hatti gold mine area in Lingsugur Taluk, where they use some chemical to sort of clean up the gold, and they just kind of drain it onto the surface, and after rainfalls everything goes inside, and there are lots of cases of arsenicosis and fluorosis in that area. So we have sort of proposed this to understand the vulnerability in terms of the water quality. Second, LNOB we call, like, leave no one behind. So this is a second thing in terms of vulnerability, because there is a lots of caste dynamic as well as I would say the community issues. Those regularly happens, like SC cannot go and fetch water from ST's water point or something like that. Those we already had been come across. So I think these are some of the most important thing that we found, can be a very, very important and helpful thing to, bring the community's perception. Third thing, during the same study, what we felt is the image of the government. Like the image of the government has to change in India. I think that is the most important thing. And I'll be putting, some of the questions about the image of the government as well. Sorry to be very straightforward here, because the bus stands of our country, the hospitals, wherever people go, they always feel that, hey, if the government ka hai, we can do anything. So before flushing, they never bother about flushing the water. They just go, use toilet, come back. And we had come across some of the hospitals in Raichur where there is functional laboratory, but there is no functional toilet. So where they will, go and fetch the urine sample from. So there are multiple issues on the ground, those we had thought of, and why the answer is very simple. It's government ka hai. So sort of, we are trying to get the perception, what people think about the government as well, and what is the image of the government. I'm not making a political statement here or anything, or not blaming any party here, but just trying to come up with the image of the government, what people think about the government. I think somewhat we need to change that as well. So I'll be stopping here, sir. Thank you so much. Yeah, for giving an opportunity.
Thank you so much, Dennis.
Yeah.
I think what we'll do is run through some of our presentations quickly, and then we take questions at the end. Abhishek, you want to come in now?
Yeah, sure, Dr. Satyajit. Thank you, Dennis. And so before we get on understanding what are the key aspects that we will be undertaking under this study on climate and water and climate change in the Uttarakhand theme. So I would quickly take a minute and a half to introduce myself and Chirag, and then Pailin can run you through the context of the whole project and what are we going to do. Yeah, so give me a second. So let me just. So yeah, if you all can see the screen. So basically the organization where I belong to is Central Himalayan Rural Action Group, which is also called as Chirag. And we have been operational in primarily starting from Uttarakhand since 1986, with about 3.5 decades of working with the communities. And So these are the four sectors in which the organization works, essentially natural resource management, education, livelihood, and healthcare. And so before United Nations recognized the Sustainable Development Goals, so I would say since last 3.5 decades, Chirag has been advocating 14 of the 17 SDGs recognized by the United Nations. And the common point among all of these is again what the core theme of our study is, the involvement of community. And earlier in the day, so there were a lot of insights from Parmeshwaran ji, Dr. Adarsh, T. Arun, Madhavan ji, as well as Mr. Krishna, as to why it becomes very important on the perspective of any implementing agency or any government body to have communities buy off. So basically emphasizing on the bottoms up approach in any developmental initiative. So Chirag has always believed that any developmental initiative, be it mitigating a climate change or any kind of challenge, it becomes very important to involve communities so that we are assured of the sustainability aspects. And so this is basically the geographical presence of Chirag. So we have been active in around 4 of this 11 Indian Himalayan region states, and primarily starting from Uttarakhand and covering almost all the hilly districts of Uttarakhand region. And so this is the whole journey of our Springshed development and management. And the premise of our study is, again, there has been a heavy dependence of the communities on spring waters, which is almost 90% of dependence of the communities. And so these days, because of several climatic changes and in fact a lot of anthropogenic factors as well, these springs are on decline. So they are converting from a perennial source to seasonal, and many of them have even dried up to the proportion of 1/6. And that begins, the whole debate of why it is essential to, invest on having dialogue on this particular theme. And so after 13 years of our journey into Springshed management, now the policy level inputs have been recognized by the Niti Aayog, and there have been a lot of dialogues on the lines of why and how we can emphasize on the Springshed management activity so that water is secured in the hills. And so through this study, we also want to bring in the importance of community involvement in this whole aspect of Springshed management, and see as to what are the reforms, or what are earlier I was listening to Dr. Adarsh, who was mentioning that it's very important that we need to build case studies which are supporting policy level policy makers as to what should be the right approach of looking at a development on the field. And so we look to collate these inputs from the field through a fresh perspective of the students from UCSP, and see what kind of outcome comes from this. So it can be definitely a reality check, as Parmeshwaran ji had mentioned. And now I would hand over it to Pailan so that she can run you quickly through the themes that we will be looking at during the study. Yeah, over to you, Pailan. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me share my screen then. Okay. So as Abhishek just talked about, so I will not repeat any of that. Present this. Our project is on water and climate change, and specifically spring water recharge and development initiatives in Uttarakhand. As Abhishek just previously mentioned, some of the issues facing springs right now is climate change and development. And also because of unreliable water pipelines, this increases the dependence on springs. And because of that, between 80 and 90% of the Himalayan region depends on springs for their daily water usage. Additionally, springs drying up also have a cascading effect for overall urban and rural Uttarakhand, because it's from these small springs that streams originate and then form major rivers. So this is an incredibly critical issue. The study itself is on an analysis of Chirag's rejuvenation program, which attempts to center the role of the community in spring water recharge. So there's 3 themes that we're focusing on in the study. Theme 1 is spring shed development and management, which includes understanding the science behind spring water, the impact of climate change and development in Uttarakhand on water security in the hills, understanding agricultural and domestic water needs, such as water budgeting and establishing a baseline of water needed for specific communities, Chirag strategy in addressing these issues and their attempt to empower communities, and overall the importance of community governance, such as water user groups' role in spring shed development and management. Theme 2 centers on community ownership and governance. So it studies, what this is going to attempt to study is the role of the community in sustainability, understanding their priorities and the problems they face, and their overall perspectives about community and development initiatives and what works and what does not. So essentially a reflection on Chirag's program. And theme 3, policy interventions. This will focus on the political empowerment and the capacity built for communities to take over post-Chirag's presence and understanding their overall perspectives, also on what they would like to see change in policy and otherwise. So the methods, as everyone has also previously talked about, is focused on the active participation of the water user groups in the analysis of spring water recharge and overall water security. Some of the methods that we will be using is information gathering through detailed treatment plans shared by Chirag in order to understand Chirag's methods and indicators of successful spring shed development initiatives. We will also be using PRA tools such as interviews with water user groups to gain an understanding on their perspectives of water security and their daily water needs and their reflections on Chirag's approach. We'll also be using transect walks to identify the resources, landscape, and spring sheds, such as the point of groundwater discharge, the rock pattern, and water flow path and topography. Problem trees will be done with the community as well to help identify problems and their causes and to generate objectives and strategies to address these. And an activity plan will also be used to help select the best options within the context of local economics and social norms through holding a discussion with the water user groups. Some of the expected policy and academic outputs. So by the end of this study, we are going to develop a case study that focuses on the empowerment communities and also drives attention to policy reforms. So it's based on the information collected based on the community's participation. So what worked and what did not about Chirag's approach. Do water user groups feel more empowered to take over post-Chirag? And do they also feel more politically empowered as well? Some of the policy reform recommendations that are also expected to change and will also most likely expand throughout the project is an emphasis on community engagement in development initiatives, such as conducting environmental reviews on future development schemes with the active participation of the community to prevent damage to local aquifers. It may also look like providing funds and services directly to communities in order for them to maintain and recharge spring sheds. And that is it. Thank you.
So you are on mute.
Satyajit, you're muted.
We've just been told by Sangeeta that we have time, that we can use this room till about 1 o'clock. So that gives us about half an hour more. So we'll have more time for discussion. So that is absolutely great news. Thank you, Sangeeta. Kunzes, you'd like to come in on Ladakh? You're muted. Kunzes, you're muted.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah. Hello, everyone, distinguished panelists and all other people present here. I'm Kunzes Cholma from Delhi University. I'm a PhD research scholar from Delhi University, and currently I'm serving as a Deputy Superintendent of Police in Kashmir Police Service. Today, so first of all, I think I'll share my screen.
Yes.
Yeah. Is it visible?
Yes, now it is.
Yeah. Okay. My topic is on climate change and water, institutional diversity in governance in context of Ladakh. So my understanding of issue of climate change and water is based primarily not just on the literary source, but various reports and primarily on my own field experiences. According to IPCC, the frequency and magnitude of various climatic ingredients have changed over the period of time. One second. Yeah. Yeah, it has this climatic ingredients, the like the increase in ocean temperature or the ice sheet and glacier mass loss or permafrost degradation and increasing flooding is something that being witnessed in this whole scenario of climate change, and this is further causing a challenge to the adaptation, not just to the humans but also to the nature. This trend is further being catalyzed by the rapid growth of population, socio-economic advancement, and of course, tourism sector, especially in places like Ladakh. And Ladakh, what's happening because of all these changes in the lifestyle and the basic livelihood, that it is resulting in unplanned development and misfit technological deployment, like the flush-based toilet system, which is very water intensive or water guzzling, where in Ladakh traditionally practice dry compost toilet. Also, the stability of mountain slopes and infrastructure is further weakened by retreating glaciers. You can see the picture, like earlier, these barren mountains were almost covered by snow, and now it's snow are hardly very less chunk of snow are visible as of now in present time. And also there's a issue of this thawing permafrost. Also, the reports are also saying, and even at the field level, it's also been reported that the number of glacial lakes and the area of glacial lakes are increasing. So I would like to bring one person like Sanjin Dorje from Gya. He's an award-winning filmmaker at the international level and has made couple of films like Jungwa, Sherpart of Glacier. And according to his experiences and interaction with researchers on the climatology in the glacial lake formation, he says that the number of glacial lakes in Ladakh is increasing, and as such, there have been reports of this flooding, glacial lake outburst flooding induced migration. That is something that I'm currently studying and will be able to tell more about that in the coming months. There's further evidence according to IPCC of reduced localized agriculture activity in Hindu Kush region. This again I could relate with the Ladakh, where in number of the agricultural activity is coming down, especially in the urban lay. Even in the village like Pyang, where I've recently visited, there's a reports that the land especially owned by the monastery are being left barren by the are being left barren primarily because in the past these lands were cultivated by the household in order to supplement their income, but now because of untimely availability of water and less availability of water, these lands are being left barren. And even in the Leh itself, the town, the urban portion of Leh, there's a report of these lands, many of the agricultural lands are being left barren, and the prime reason that people are giving that they do not have enough water, the water availability is not on time. And apart from that, the change in the species composition from the perspective of climate change are also reported in the mountainous region. So I would like to quote Sonam Wangchuk. He is a person behind the concept of ice stupa, and also working on the Himalayan Institute of Alternate Learning for sustainable mountain sustainability aspect. So he says that usually rise in temperature is one of the main indicator of climate change, but in Ladakh, one could see that the fruits and plants that did not grow in the past are growing now. Insects like mosquito, which people did not see in past, are seen now. Most importantly, glaciers, which 2 decades back were just seen at the head of the village, are nowhere to be seen directly in recent times. Places which were not suitable for apricot cultivation in Ladakh, especially the eastern belt, which is more colder than the western belt of Ladakh, they are now, there's a report boasts that these areas are also cultivating apricots. Other climatic events like frequent flooding, uncertain rainfall are something unusual that Ladakh have been witnessing. For example, the floods in 2006, 2010, 2015, which created not only fear in the minds of people, but also caused huge destructions to lives and property. And of course, there are many minor flooding related activity and that are taking place and that are likely to take place if sustainable approaches are not adopted. And with respect to the climate change, what people's narration about the climate change, I met a couple of women organization in Leh and also in contact with many people who have experienced this climate change in the lifetime. So I would like to quote Sonam Meme Stopdan. So he is an 88-year-old person. He says that when he was young, there used to be at least 2 to 3 feet snowfall in the winter. But now in the present scenario, even a 1 feet snowfall is hardly seen. And in this winter, there was hardly any snowfall that people have witnessed, that the people from Ladakh have witnessed. Apart from that, in context of the, this is something like, just wanted to say how because of the frequent flooding that the water streams have been washed away. And also there's a report of spring water that is getting dried. For example, in Leh itself, the Chubi spring water had been dried because of the climate change, because of the over extraction of water resources by deployment of pumps to supplement these big hotels. And also in the village like Pyang, there's a report of reducing the spring water and that is getting dried, and because of that thing that have caused strain not only the drinking water but also on the agriculture activities. So my study, the objective of my study is to focus on the role of institution in water change for net zero emission in the present scenario, where global warming is the most resonating theme threatening human existence as of now. Institutions played a crucial role in managing resources for sustainable development for all aspects of life. So in context of Ladakh, I would be primarily talking about the Goba and the Churpon system, which have played an important role in past and are still playing. These institutions works as a people's body with greater social recognition, and there's also get a sense of responsibility and ownership that is seen towards these institutions. So Goba is a village level mechanism, is a person who heads that village, and he is responsible for taking all the major activities in the village. For example, he also ensures that the traditional belief systems are sustained, and these belief systems are important because they were very nature friendly, like restraining people from polluting water resources. If anyone found polluting these water resources, they will be punished. Goba will announce, will punish those people, and all people, section of people will abide by his decision. Apart from that, rituals like beginning of new season are marked by putting this butter on the horns of Zo. Zo is like you can see that the hybrid of yak and cow, so it's majorly used for plowing purpose. So putting that butter is marked as auspicious, something auspicious, and hoping for something good as good produce in the season. So this is something that such kind of process are initiated by the Goba in the village assembly. And as I already said, that he's also responsible for adjudicating the disputes within the village and among the village. And in order to restrain people for polluting water resources in Ladakh, many belief systems that have developed over the period of time. You can see the structures. This is the right left hand side.
1 minute.
Yes, I'll try to finish that quickly. So right hand side is a water, is a zinc. Zinc is a traditional method of storing water for the cultivation, usually stored in the water in the summers. So this money is used to restrain, and even the prayer flags is used to restrain water for people from polluting these water resources. So this is the village I visit. So this and one more thing about the Churpon system. The Churpon is a water manager who is responsible for distribution of water to village in equitable manner. But in Pyang, I witnessed that they do not have a churpon system, primarily because they have a good resource or a good source of water resources. But in present time, this water resource are also getting there's a less amount of water that's available because of the retreating glacier. And also this because Pyang has been divided into 8 mohallas, so distribution of waters takes place in such a way that there's no conflict. So Churpon was a person so as to ensure that there's no conflict in the distribution of water. And in Pyang, that role is sometimes taken care by Goba. So even the Churpon works under the Goba. So Goba has is the head of the village in all this sense. So he's just a picture, and so this is a zing where the water gets stored for the irrigation purpose during the summer. So it is one of the traditional approach of storage water, so as to in a region which has always been a water scarce region. So at the end, I just want to say that as Parmeshwar Iyer said, that water is a great connector, and of course, if we sustain water resources, then we can sustain the climate change and contain carbon emission. So that's all for as of now. So I'll be coming like in the future studies, I'll be bringing more about the ground realities. That's it from my side as of now. Thank you for this wonderful opportunity.
Thank you so much, Julie. So we moved from the semi-arid Karnataka to the Himalayas. Chirag in Uttarakhand and Moses from Ladakh. Now we move to coastal Gujarat, Karthik and Megan. This is a study which is being done by with the Aga Khan Foundation. Yeah, Megan, we can't hear you. Karthik, Megan, we can't hear you.
Hello?
Hi.
Yes.
Oh, there you go. Go ahead, Karthik.
Oh, thank God. My internet connection is not very good here, so I'll try to be as quick as possible. But hey, Dr. Singh, hey, Megan. So we are, Megan and I, we are working on women, water, and climate change in Gujarat. So here, Megan, can you like change the slide? Yeah. So this is the area that we are focusing on. So it's the state of Gujarat, and in Gujarat particularly, it's Surendranagar district and Saila block of Surendranagar district. So the block we are working in is historically drought prone. So there sometimes it rains, and for a long period of time it just doesn't rain, and water is one of the biggest issues. Apart from that, this region people has very less education. They still use banned chemicals, banned pesticides. This is again historically drought-prone area. The drinking water is one of the biggest issues. Other than that, like there are social customs and norms set up in a way which does help one group of society, and it makes another group of society very vulnerable. Megan, next. Hello?
Yes, Megan.
Oh, yeah. Megan, if you can change the slide.
Slide has been changed.
Hello.
Slide has been changed, Karthik.
Okay, it's her turn then, Megan.
Megan, are you muted?
There we go. Hi. Sorry, I couldn't figure out how to unmute while I was sharing my screen. Hi. So going off of what Karthik was saying, our study is based on the idea that the wealthiest people in the world, so the top 1 to top 10% of people in the world are responsible for the greatest amount of pollution, but they will experience the least amount of consequences. And so, as you can see on the graph on the left, the poorest 50% of people are responsible for only around 10% of total lifestyle consumption emissions. But these people, who are also the focus of our study, will be experiencing the worst consequences of pollution. And in that context, women, as you can see on the graph on the right, women are at the very bottom of this pyramid, and will suffer the greatest consequences because of the way that the patriarchal society is set up and the expectations placed on women to adapt to these changes and support their households in the face of extreme challenge. So specifically moving to Gujarat. Gujarat is, as was mentioned previously, is an arid region that is very prone to droughts. And historically, in the past few years, in times of drought, there have been really big issues of who's given the water from the Narmada Canal, which comes from a dam and supplies most of the water for the region. And there have been lots of issues because the divide between farmers and industries in the same areas. The industries and factories are given more water than farmers. And while farmers have little to no water, industries have full tanks and continuous flows of water. So that's become an issue, which has made farmers, especially in poor and rural areas, even more vulnerable to climate change. And these are the 6 key themes of our study. They're all interrelated, so which Karthik will explain in the next slide. But our 6 key themes are climate change, natural resources and agriculture, drinking water, local governance, health, hygiene and nutrition, and livelihoods, with a focus on women, gender, and marginalized communities. And that focus extends throughout our whole study.
How's the internet connection, Karthik? Megan, you want to continue?
I can try. This is, he wrote this part, but I'll do my best if his internet isn't working. So our study will be based off of examining chain reactions in society that are caused by this lack of water that's due to climate change. So I think in this slide he was explaining that as a direct result of a lack of water, there can be damage to the sesame crop, and I guess in general the general idea of the outcome of that issue might only extend to, if the crop is damaged, then there will be a reduced production. But our study will try to highlight that rather than just 1 or 2 outcomes, that damage for just one crop.
Yes, Karthik is here.
Please save me.
Yeah, let me just quickly explain this. So usually when we do any climate change study, what we tend to focus on is, okay, the climate change happened, maybe it rained a lot, or maybe it didn't rain, and then it impacted agriculture, and then it farmers lost a lot of money. Usually that is what we focus on, but Megan and we are currently focusing on the micro chain reaction that happens. Like when the farmer loses his money, what goes deep down in his family, what happens on each individual of his family. So this is just one simple example of sesame crop. So climate change is, I have seen the data for last 50 years in this region. So from last 3 years, it is raining at random times. And due to that, last year, what happened, that standing sesame crop failed. A lot of farmers that did only sesame in their fields, they lost their entire crop. And so here's just an example of chain reaction that what went down later on. So production reduced significantly. So there a lot factors goes in. One, the income of the household, which decreased. Second thing happened is
okay. Megan, can you quickly conclude?
Yes, we can move on. But I think you can get the idea from.
Okay, Karthik is
from
there.
the graph.
Karthik, can you quickly conclude?
Yeah. Okay, I'm just gonna go quickly. One happened, the income of the household, it decreased. So they couldn't buy a lot of inputs like oil, or like they used to buy good oil, good quality oil, but now they have less money, so they're gonna go for cheaper alternatives of whatever food they are getting. B, the woman is the head of the household, even though she works in field, still having a household is her job, her responsibility according to the societal norms. So women suffers the great consequences that even though there are less inputs to work with, she still has to manage the household. She still has to feed, like whatever less amount of things she's getting, she still has to run the house. So that increases her stress, her mental stress. It also increases the fights between husband and wife, or like mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. And in some cases, we also heard from women that domestic violence increased as well because of there was less money in the house. So there were frequent fights. And the third factor that goes in is home consumption, because this sesame crop, A, they used to sell it, and B, they used to keep some for their home consumption. And these are the items that I've shown here. People make kacharu and like chikki and this laddus from sesame. And since there was less production, men tried to sell all this thing in the market so they can get as much money as possible. At the same time, women have to manage with less like till or sesame in their household. So all this nutritious.
Okay, let's stop with we get a sense of the study. Unless you have just 30 seconds more.
Quickly? Yes, 30 seconds
please.
more. We're going to skip that. So in the very end, our study is hoping to demonstrate and assess inequality and the differentiated impacts of climate change. And in the end, we hope to reveal not only the hardships that are experienced by marginalized groups, specifically women, but also to highlight the innovations and the adaptations and the ingenuity that is coming from these women and these marginalized communities to show the resilience and to encourage not only sympathy for their struggle, but respect for their ingenuity. And hopefully we will be able to promote policy ideas that will be able to help the communities help themselves. That's it.
Thank you so much. We left it so late that Krishna Bhaskar, who was one of our respondents, had to leave. Can I ask Param to quickly come in, and after that Shailaja, 4 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes each.
Yeah, sure. No, I think excellent presentations. So congratulations to the students and the partners who are all working on the ground. And the fact that you've chosen these 4 or 5 different states, different agroclimatic conditions, I think is going to add to the replicability and the representativeness of these studies. So I think they've been very well chosen. And I think each study brought out a different dimension of what is the problem and what are the possible solutions. What is that hypothesis which they're trying to establish. For example, the last one on the disproportionate impact of climate change related to water on women, which intuitively we all know, but hopefully we can bring some evidence from this study in Gujarat. And again, in Raichur, one of the most water-stressed districts in Karnataka. Again, the study impact on groundwater, but also on governance, which came out in the end, and I think quite frankly pointed out how behavior changes when something is Sarkari property versus their own. And I have to come back to Shailaja's point on, how do we change farmers' behavior and why are we going for paddy for the planet instead of millets? Good point as well. And again, we are finding out, and hopefully the study can tell how can you change the behavior of farmers? You need to incentivize them when it comes to, so a common question which many of people asked us when we were working on this in India. So, why can't farmers move to less water intensive crops? And the answer is pretty basic. They're making an income out of these crops. So if the FCI continues to procure wheat and rice in large quantities, Punjab, which wasn't doing much of paddy before the Green Revolution, now is doing it because electricity is subsidized, and so groundwater is mined. But again, so those are some policy issues which we know about. But I think these studies are going to give us that ground reality and voices from below, particularly of the poor. Fascinating to hear about the Ladakh story again, of how climate is affecting, fruit cultivation, and it's all happening in a relatively short period of time. So again, there, it'll be fascinating to get these studies. And then we heard from Uttarakhand and Chirag, an NGO which I know Madhavan has worked with, and I used to work with when I was doing the Swajal project. At that time, there was a gentleman called Cyril. I don't know if Cyril is who was leading Chirag, and Spring Shed Development.
Cyril was in Bhubaneswari Ashram.
Sorry, he was in Bhubaneswar. Who was in Chirag? I've forgotten.
Rajiv.
That's right. Bhubaneswari Mahila Ashram, right? That was.
Yes.
Cyril was
Cyril Raphael.
I think old age and climate change is affecting me as well. Hopefully it wasn't affecting the internet, which seemed to be a problem in the last presentation. But look, these are very good questions. I think the important thing here is it would be really useful from a policy perspective for these studies to actively engage not just with communities, but also get the perspective of I would say the district administration, the development officials, to understand what are their constraints, right? It's easier to point out the challenges and the problems, but it's important to understand the constraints, the political economy issues, to use that much bandied about term, in terms of the context in which all these officials are functioning. Because in the end, we've got to find a practical solution, right? It's great to be idealistic, and we always expect the youth to challenge the system. That's what they need to do. But please look at the overall context when you present your findings. So I would say that. And I think the second important thing is when you are in the field, Satyajit has set up many of these studies before. He's really good at it because he engages local NGOs who know the context. So that helps. It softens the landing for some of you who may not have worked on the ground before. And he connects you, with different people there. So get a range of perspectives. I think that's quite important. Talk to the GPs, talk to the sarpanches, talk to the administrators. So get a sort of multi-dimensional, multi-stakeholder perspective. Because without that, those different ideas, it's going to be, your study could come across as not being kind of multi-dimensional. But I think this is going to be very useful. And the earlier, Satyajit, we can get, I would say policymakers at the state level, even in the government of India, it's an India study, people like Amarjit who addressed this IPPN session involved, like this discussion we're having now. I would go out and make a presentation to Amitabh Kant in the Niti Aayog. He'll be very interested in this, particularly as he's working on the aspirational districts in India. So I think early sort of signals to policymakers, this is the study, they'll give you their perspective, and then your study will be even more useful to them. It won't come as a surprise. So let me stop there, but thank you so much for involving me. It's been a fascinating session just listening to these presentations and hearing the panelists.
Thank you so much, Param. That's a lot of encouragement that we are doing something which is right. And thank you for staying up so late. Thank you very much. Shailaja.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'd like to commend all the teams and thank you for also sending your presentations and your plans for research. It was really helpful. And even though it was so early in the morning, I was completely riveted by the presentation. So all credit to all of you. I'd like to ask you to focus on two things. One point that Satyajit made in his initial slides, that really nice juxtapositioning between Chambers and Sen. Why are you using participatory approaches? Are you then really getting the perceptions of those people? Are your research tools being used most effectively? I think you've got a fantastic set of tools. You've made some great progress. The slideshows were really exciting, but I'd like you to be able to address those because I think going forward, you might get the answers you want. So for example, In the Raichur case, the question was, what do people think? Maybe that's what you need to do when you go in. Maybe focus a little more. If that's your biggest question, use that set of tools first. So maybe do a focus group earlier on rather than later on. The value of participatory tools, as Param has pointed out so effectively in the comments preceding, is the ability to garner as many points of view, bring in as many stakeholders as possible. In relation to thinking about the discussions on spring shed and how important that is in so many of these studies, it's really interesting because at one level you're looking at water change. How different is an area where water is changing from one where water is actually scarce? How do people see it? I mean, we have an understanding of semi-arid, 350 mm is semi-arid, but a community that's losing water or gaining water, how do they see the risk associated with changes in water? So going below perception, looking at how they actually see trade-offs in water might be something that's worth using. And then finally, a set of comments that I had, and thank you so much for bringing women into the room. And next time, can we have panels with women in them, please, Satyajit? I loved hearing everyone's perspectives, but let me just put that in the room. I really like the point about sesame. I like the point about what people do. Let's get the graininess of the livelihoods. I love the point that Kunza made about strings. I think trying to understand the actually modalities of how local institutional governance works for resources and for the commodities that they produce, mapping that on the ground would be very useful. I'll stop at this point and not abuse my time anymore, Sajid. I've got notes on everything, so I will proceed. But thank you so much. I really got a great insight, and I look forward to engaging with the teams. Thank you.
Just on the women part, Shailaja, of the study partners from our end, we have only 2 endangered male species apart from myself, and the rest are women. I won't take any time. I would just like to thank all the panelists for being here from across the continent. First of all, thanks to Paramari Iyer, thanks to Bhaskar, Arun, Adarsh, who have been here. Adarsh is going to stay back with us. Dennis, Nick, Megan, Kunzes, Karthik. I'm really sorry, Karthik, if you're still here. Hopefully, we'll try to give you a little extra time because of connectivity. Abhishek and Pailin, thank you so much for this wonderful session. We will move straight to the next session. And can I invite?
Thank you, and we'll catch up with you later. Good luck to everyone.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.